Oh, hello. I'm just working on my fret. Why? Because I want to paint like Bob Ross. I'm about to do a Bob Ross landscape painting. Bob Ross's landscape paintings are quick and they're beautiful, but they can still take about 30 minutes and maybe more if you're not quite as fast as Bob Ross. I want to see if I can simplify his process a little bit and create a beautiful landscape painting in just 15 minutes. Let's give it a go. For this painting, I'm going to keep the sky really simple. Just a little bit of blue and a lot of white to make a very light blue for the sky. And a good tip for mixing sky blues is to mix the white in with the corner of your blue and add just a little bit of blue at a time. That way the blue can't take over and make your sky color too dark. Then I'm going to use a large brush to paint the sky. I'm going to load that brush up with some of that nice light blue I just mixed up, and then dip it into the water. Using water with the paint is going to allow me to spread this into a really nice thin layer and cover the page quickly. Have fun as you spread that sky blue across the entire page, using just a little bit of paint and water on your brush at a time so that it never gets thick or globby. Think of this as like you've got a little bit of butter and you're trying to spread it across a whole piece of toast. And you'll end up with a beautiful, nice, thin layer. Every layer of a landscape painting needs texture, and for this nice light blue sky, we need some white puffy clouds. So I'm going to load up the end of a brush with just a little bit of white paint and just dance, flutter, loop-de-loop that brush across the page, making really nice, light, puffy shapes. I like for my clouds to be kind of puffy at the top and then more flatter and kind of faded into the sky at the bottom. We'll paint a nice big cloud to the left, one towards the top right, cropped off the page. Make sure the layer of paint that you paint your clouds with stays nice and thin. If you lay the paint on too thick, the clouds are going to look thick and heavy, and we want light and fluffy. I'll add one more little cloud down there towards the bottom, and I'll name that cloud Jeff. Yep, Jeff the Cloud. And now the sky is done, and we're ready for the next layer of our painting. But first, I need to clean the brush. So I'll clean it off in the water cup, and then dry the devil out of it. The next layer of my painting is going to be some rocky mountains. I want these mountains to be a brownish gray. So I'm going to start by making an orange, and then adding gray to that orange. A grayish orange color is going to give it that earthy, rocky, brown, gray mountain color. Now this is where this painting really gets fun, and this is one of my favorite Bob Ross techniques. Take a palette knife and load up the edge of that palette knife with the color you want for your mountain. Just like that, a little dollop right along the edge. And then using the edge and the point of the palette knife, scrape out the horizon line of your mountain. So I'm going to have one side of the mountain angle down to the right there. Nice steep side on the left. And then I'll keep reloading that palette knife as I start to run out of paint, making sure I have paint right along the edge of the palette knife, and then scraping along to create rocky mountain points. A couple little smaller peaks there, fading off down to the right. And I think this mountain range needs one more big peak on the left side. Remember, just like Bob Ross says, this landscape's up to you. So when it comes to the shape of your mountains, just follow your heart and you'll end up with a beautiful mountain range. And just like that, we have a majestic mountain range. And I'm going to bring those mountains down a little bit further than I think I need to. That's going to make it easy for the next layers of my painting to overlap with them and not have any spaces between the layers. The only thing these mountains need now is texture. So I'm going to mix up a darker version of this brownish gray by adding some black to it. I'll add a little bit of blue as well to give these shadows a nice, cool, cold look. And then I'll load that trusty palette knife up again. And this time, as I scrape it down the mountain, I'm only going to scrape it down the left sides of the mountains. Shadows won't be across the entire mountain range, they'll just be on one side of the ridge. So I'm going to start on the middle of the mountain, that's where the ridge is, and then scrape all the way down the left side of that mountain to create that dark shadow side. As you scrape the palette knife down the mountain, do it very lightly, and that's what's going to create those rocky areas. If you press down too hard, you're just going to turn that entire mountainside dark brown. And what we want is to have those little specks and spaces and rough looking areas, and that comes from just kind of softly scraping the side of that palette knife down without putting too much pressure. Spreading down the side of these little peaks, leaving a little bit of that light brown on the right side of each peak. I'm reloading the palette knife every time I start to run out of that. If you don't have any paint on your palette knife, you're not going to be creating rough textures. All you're going to be doing is just smearing the paint that's already on your canvas and actually smoothing it out, which is the opposite of what we want to do. We are looking for rough, jagged rock textures, just like that. Awesome. All right, and we are ready to clean that brush, dry the devil out of it, and move on to the third layer of the painting. For the third layer, I'm going to mix up a grass green for an alpine meadow. I'm going to use a lot of yellow, a little bit of blue, and even a touch of red to make that grass ever so slightly brownish. I'm also going to lighten it up with a bit of white. Now I'm happy with that grass color, so I'm going to paint that horizon line and just fill in the page, fill in that bottom third of the page with that nice grass green. I am going to leave a little bit of a gap between the field and the mountains, and you'll see why after I finish the field. But for now, just trust me. I will make sure that I bring that grass all the way to the left edge and right edge of the paper and all the way down to the bottom. Now this field needs texture, and all I have to do to give a grassy texture is to mix up a slightly different color of green. Now your different color of green could be darker, lighter, browner. In this case, I'm going to make it a little bit yellower than my base coat. As long as this new green is a little bit different than the base coat, my textures are going to show up. So to create this texture, I'm going to make sure that the very end of the brush is loaded up with some of that paint. Not too much, because we don't want this to be globby. So just a little bit of paint on that brush, and then make very light upwards brush strokes, allowing each bristle's individual texture to show through. If you press down too hard, you're just going to get one big bold brush stroke, and that's not what we want. We want to see the individual hairs of the brush. So just keep dancing that brush around the page, creating those little sprigs of grass across the entire field. Sometimes it looks good for the sprigs to be a little bit taller and bigger in the front of the page and a little bit shorter towards the back. And what you'll end up with is a really nice grassy texture for your field, where you can imagine running barefoot through that field and what the blades of grass would feel like against your feet. And now we are officially ready for the final layer of the painting. The final layer of the painting is going to be an evergreen forest that's between the mountains and the field. Since the evergreens grow on top of the field, they had to be our last layer so that we could overlap them with the field. The color of the evergreen trees needs to be different from the color of the field, so I'm mixing up a darker blue-green for these evergreen trees. To paint these evergreen trees, I'm going to use a flat, thin brush and load up the end of the bristles with some of that dark bluish-green paint. You always start from the top of the evergreen tree and work your way down. On the far left side of the page, I'm going to have a pretty tall evergreen, and I'm going to make some nice zigzagging, sweeping brush strokes as I work my way down, basically creating a triangle shape. But you want to be able to see your brush strokes. Don't hide your brush strokes or turn these trees into like a really neat triangle shape. You want it to be a little bit organic looking, natural looking, so don't try to be too neat. Just let those brush strokes flow and zigzag across the page in a natural, haphazard pattern. Across the middle of the page, I'm going to make these trees just a little bit shorter, but they do have to be tall enough to overlap with the base of the mountains and overlap a little bit with the field. And just filling in that little thin blue strip that I left. Make some of the trees a little bit taller than the others, keeping with that same zigzag brushstroke style so you can see the texture of the evergreen branches. And then I'm going to do one more really tall evergreen tree on the right side of the page that's actually a little bit higher than the mountains. Since it's closer to us, it's possible for an evergreen tree to be a little bit taller than the mountains from the perspective we're looking at it from. I'm just keeping with those nice zigzaggy side-to-side brush strokes, creating each individual branch of this evergreen. Now these evergreen trees already have pretty good texture, but we can make it even better by mixing up another type of green. I'm gonna make this green even bluer and a little bit darker by adding some blue and some black. And I'm gonna use this color using the same brush strokes as before, just going back across the evergreens and adding in some kind of little darker shadows underneath the branches, just scattering in that darker green color to give these trees more texture. Apologies that the camera went out of focus here, but in just a second it'll focus. There we go. And you can see what I was doing there. All right, now this painting is finished. We got a nice blue sky, beautiful rugged rough mountains, a grassy field, and some nice evergreen trees. All right, it's your turn. Happy painting.